I'm not going to read the whole story. I'm going to pick up where we left off, and we'll read pieces of it through that. I think you know the story pretty well by now. So this is the man born blind, and Jesus heals him, obviously, and they were not happy about that. So some of the things that the curriculum says that are takeaways from this: that Christ was never too busy to win someone to himself, and that is true. Christ is more concerned with the welfare of others than his own, and that is true. Christ notices the outcasts of our society, the ones whom the typical person shuns. I think of those three, that last one is the most important. And we talked about that, about how we treat each other matters, and how we treat each other shows our faith or lack of faith, or at least lack of understanding our faith. So I'm going to tell you a story. I have a friend named Jenny. I've known Jenny for a long time. I met her when she was a freshman in high school, and I was her FCA, Fellowship of Christian Athletes leader. It was the year after I resigned from Millard North, and it was the Millard North FCA. And I knew right away that she wasn't a believer at the time, but I knew right away that she was a kind and loving person. And indeed she is. She is one of the leaders of a camp that I go to every summer. And we go to church together, and I count her as one of my closest friends. And that it was so it was at, I told you I had resigned from, well, I hadn't resigned at that point, but I was going to. I took a leave of absence. They just wanted to make sure, they wanted to give me a leave of absence in case I wanted to come back. So that would have been in 1990. It's either 90 or 91. And I went to go have lunch at Millard North with my FCA kids. And so I walk into Millard North. It was back in the days when you could just walk in. You didn't have to have any, bells or whistles or anything. Nothing was locked. And I went into the cafeteria, and I see all my FCA kids sitting together, and I'm just like, they're having lunch together, and they're having a good time. And I'm like, where's Jenny? And I look over here, and Jenny is sitting with the boy that nobody wants to see, having lunch. That is what God calls us to. What did you say?
That was kind.
It was kind. You're right. It's exactly kind. She's very kind. And that is the kind of thing that we are called to include the unincluded, to take care of those who can't take care of themselves, to be kind and compassionate, loving one another, just as in Christ just as Christ has loved you. And that's what Jesus did. Think about the woman at the well, right? Think about the woman caught in adultery. He was willing to help people, but other people shouldn't, including this blind man, because they believed that he deserved it. He did something that made God have him be blind. What he could have done in utero, I have no idea, because he was blind by birth. But that was what they believed. And Jesus saw him, and Jesus helped him. He calls us to that very same thing. And I did this last hour because I want to just say this, because you guys are young, you're sophomores, and I just want to encourage you to be kind, especially to those students who are, I'm not going to use the word bully because it's overused, who are mistreated. And if you see someone mistreating another student, please have the guts to tell that person to cut it out. This is a place where Jesus is lifted high. And nothing like that could ever happen in this place. And it's personal to me because I was that person when I was in not the person that was persecuting others, being so it's personal. They believe that he did something to deserve being born blind, but I don't know what he could have done in utero that was wrong. But they believe that physical problems were punishment for sin. In this case, it can't be true, right? I don't think you can. Sin in the womb. So the truth is, though, that physical ailments allow God to manifest His glory. There is a long list of people who went through some sort of ordeal or some sort of malady or some sort of problems that ended up allowing them to be even more impactful for God's family. And I'm going to talk about a few people. Most of them I know personally. Toward the end of my mother's life, she had a best friend named Robin. And Robin and her son really became members of our family. Robin had two sons, an older son who was kind of, I think, out maybe at college or had a job somewhere out of state. So I met him, but I didn't really know him. Her younger son's name was Chad. And I think Chad was in his 20s when I met him. And Chad had Down syndrome. You know what Down syndrome is? And we picked our preschool for our children, first with Josh, starting with Josh, because Chad was a helper in that preschool. And Josh turned 3 for preschool on September 7th. So he was one of the youngest in the class. And I was a little afraid that he was going to be kind of unruly. So we thought, well, he'll see a familiar face. He'll be, he'll have Chad. And it did help. And Chad was indispensable in that preschool. He was helpful in so many ways. Chad taught me that we shouldn't overlook people with disabilities. And in fact, in 1993, in December of 1993, I wrote a poem for Chad. And a copy of this, he died of his heart. He had heart. His heart was little, and he had heart issues, and he died. I don't know if it was 95, maybe, I don't know, 98, I don't know, but he died early. But before that, I wrote this poem called What I've Learned from Chad. I wish you knew this friend of mine, a sweet and handsome lad, but rather let me write of him, this lovely man named Chad. I've learned so very many things. They far exceed this pad. But let me try to list a few, some things I've learned from Chad. To possess a deep and childlike faith, the kind I wish I had. To see in all whatever's good. That's what I see in Chad. To look at life with cheerful eyes and see it's not so bad. To laugh at unexpected times. That's what I've learned from Chad. To help whoever is in need and only be too glad. To serve with joy the least of these. That's what I've learned from Chad. A higher form of fashion sense in smashing garments clad. To match my stockings with my shirt. I've also learned from Chad. The world may see a paradox and some may not believe, but I have learned much more from Chad than he'll ever learn from me. And so I wish you knew this man. I know that if you have, you too would feel so blessed to learn so many things. When we see people who have difficulties or issues, physical or mental or whatever it is, we are called to be kind and to be helpful. And Chad taught me that. But there are other people that I know about. One is Alex France. Anybody know Alex France? Anybody on the cross country team? And yeah. He goes to our church. I remember when he was diagnosed. He has the same diagnosis as the youngest. I'm not going to say his name because I don't want it going out, but the same thing. And before he lost his sight, he was a great athlete. And it was when in basketball season when he started missing shots, he thought that something was wrong with his eyes, and indeed there was. He ended up going to college, going to a college in Fremont and running cross country for that school. He had a lead runner, and he would run behind that leader. And he did very well. And he, for a while, was helping Mr. Hood coach our team. So, and when you talk to him, and I go to church with him, he's always kind and upbeat. My father is another example. I've told you my story. He was about as high as you can get in the Air Force, and just about as high as you can get in business. And he, I think when he was 70, was when he was diagnosed with dementia. And he was pretty far into the dementia. One night, my parents had a small group that met at their house. And they always prayed at the end. And my dad said, may I pray? And everyone said, yes, Marty, please pray. And this was my father's prayer. Dear God, thank you for giving me this disease, because without it, I might not know how much my family loves me. That's living for Jesus. That's seeing the world through Jesus-colored glasses. I have a friend named Angela, and in utero, it was found out that she had spina bifida. And there was this, I think at the time, a kind of new procedure to do the surgery in utero to try and help it. And so she had that surgery. It ended up not really. And Angela still has to care for her daughter and will have to care for her for the rest of her life. And she's now 20 something, maybe longer than that. Yeah, it would have to be 20 something. I think she's about my daughter's age. And she does that, and she does it gladly. She loves her daughter, but it's exhausting, and it's hard, and it's, but she faithfully takes care of her. And then this is a person that I don't know, but I've heard her speak before. Anybody know the name Johnny Erickson Tata? So she was a normal Californian teenager when she did something that she did almost every day. She went down to the beach and she dove into the ocean. But something was under the water that she didn't know. And she hit her head on it and she became a quadriplegic. She has no use of her legs and very little use of one arm. And I don't know if she was a believer at that point, but she became a believer. And she has gone all over the world, not only to speak about the goodness of God and the grace of God and the power of God. She also has a ministry that collects wheelchairs and takes them over into places where people like Johnny are, and they don't have a wheelchair. I've been to Zambia 3 times, and I think it was my first time. It might have been my second time. I met this boy named Stephen, and I will never forget Stephen. Stephen had no use of his legs either. He had use of his arms. And they had made this little cart for him that had hand pedals. But he lived in the bush. There was no such thing as a paved road. There was no such thing as sidewalks. And I watched him navigate these hills thinking, oh my Lord, he's gonna fall. And he was one of the most joyful people I have ever met. He gave me a big smile every time I saw him. And I can only attribute that to his faith. Happiness is conditional. Happiness is conditioned by circumstance. Joy is not. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Joy. You can always have joy. No matter, it is separate from our circumstance. That was Stephen. He had the joy of the Lord in his soul. And I believe that was true of the man born blind as well. So we're going to talk about we're going to talk a little bit about this miracle. And his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, it was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. So one of the things that people think is that when someone's born some way, or something happens to someone like Johnny Erickson Tata, that it's God punishing them for sin. And that's exactly what the Jewish leaders believed. But Jesus very clearly said no. They asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? And Jesus sets them straight that it wasn't. Um, uh, well, basically, he said it wasn't that, right? It was for the glory of God. It's not that he sinned or anyone sinned. It's for the glory of God. So, I gotta find where I am. Yeah, that's where I am. Good. The neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar were saying, is this not the man who used to sit and beg? Some said it is he, others said no, but he is like him, he looks like him. He kept saying, I am the man. So they said to him, then how were your eyes opened? He answered, the man called Jesus made mud and anointed my eyes and said to me, go to Siloam and wash. So I went and washed and received my sight. They said to him, where is he? Where's Jesus? He said, I do not know. They brought the Pharisees to the man who had formerly been blind. Now it was a Sabbath day when Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes. So the Pharisees again asked him how he had received his sight. And he said to them, he put mud on my eyes and I washed and I see. Some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath. But others said, how can a man who is a sinner do such signs? And there was a division among them, among the people. So they said again to the blind man, what do you say about him, since he has opened your eyes? The blind man said, he is a prophet. The Jews did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they called the parents of this man who had received his sight and asked them, is this your son, who you say was born blind? How then does he now see? His parents answered, we know that this is our son and that was born blind. But how he now sees we do not know, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him, he is of age. He will speak for himself. His parents said these things because they feared the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that if anyone should confess Jesus to be the Christ, he was to be put out of the synagogue. Therefore, his parents said, he is of age, ask him. So the second time, they called the man who had been blind and said to him, give glory to God, tell the truth. We know that this man is a sinner, that Jesus is a sinner. He answered, whether he is a sinner, I do not know. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see. They said to him, did you do? What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? He answered them, I have told you already, and you would not listen. Why? Do you want to hear it again? Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples? And they reviled him, saying, you are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we do not know where he comes from. The man answered, why, this is an amazing thing. We don't know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, God listens to him. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a man. If this man were not from God, could do nothing. They answered him, you were born in utter sin, and would you teach us? And they cast him. So it talks here about sight first and then salvation. So he received his physical sight in verse 8, but he wasn't healed spiritually until verse 38. And we have to see who Jesus is and understand who Jesus is before we can trust him. We have to realize who he is And we have to realize who we are, our own condition of sin. And so we need insight into Jesus. We must see our need for Jesus. And so that progression we see in this passage is partly physical and partly spiritual. And we see this progressive sight in the man because when he's first asked about him, he says he's a man named Jesus. And the man named Jesus healed him. He was just a man. And then the next time they ask, he says he is a prophet. Um, and uh, and so he's getting closer, right? So before he was a man named Jesus, and now he's saying he is a prophet. And then the Pharisees come back again, and this time he's ready for it. And he's saying that the prophet must be God, and we see that in verses 27 and 28. So let's talk a little bit about the pool of. Okay. So he was pretty bold, wasn't he?
Yes.
He could have. It could have gone badly for him. And my question is, are we willing to be so bold? Probably not. Maybe. But we don't have that punishment over our heads. So why not, people? Um, so he's a prophet. He's of God. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the pool of Siloam. And they answered him. No, that's not the part. So this is a map of um, Jerusalem, and you see the Temple Mount up here, as it looked like in their day, and you see the Kidron Valley, and on the other side of the Kidron Valley is the Mount of Olives, and then this is called the City of David, and there's a spring, an underground spring called the Gihon Spring, and that was the spring that fed the Pool of Siloam. And Siloam means sent. And the reason it's called sent is that the water was sent from the Gihon spring, to the pool of Siloam. And it was part of a public works project from a long time before that. There. It wasn't a natural pool. It was built, and I told you that already. And it received the water from an artificial waterway. That an aqueduct is the term for that, and they built that aqueduct as part of um, that works program. The pool of Siloam received its water from Gihon, and that this spring flows continually, but intermittently it would gush, and that was because of the spring, that the spring would be gushing. So Gihon Spring sends the water, so it's sent, right, the water to the pool of Siloam. And it was the work project was a rebuilding of the city after the exile, after the people that were taken captive came home, and they were in captivity for quite some time, and to different people. They were made captive in the Syrians in 722 BC, the Babylonians in 5086 BC, and the Persians in 538 BC. So, so that it was after all of that, that when they came back, and that was part of the whole rebuilding, and they rebuilt Nehemiah is all about the rebuilding of the wall, and what's the other one? That's of the rebuilding of, I can't remember right now, but the rebuilding of Jerusalem. It talks about that in the Old Testament. So I'm going to stop there because that's where I stopped the last class. We won't have very much of this for tomorrow. You'll take that quiz, and then we'll move forward. Okay?
And basically,